Peace, family. Today is day 3 for baby Kismet coming into the world. Um, Getting a little feeding session in here. I just wanted to share some of my experience from this birth, of the breastfeeding experience that I've had now. This is my 5th child, and I did breastfeed each child. And each experience is pretty easy. I didn't have a whole lot of problems with latching or with milk production. I know a lot of moms experience different things such as engorgement and latching problems, and the supply won't come in. And I've always had a pretty decent experience with the breastfeeding, which I'm thankful for that. Now, this time around, I did experience a few things differently. I had some, not issues with the breastfeeding. Let me start off by saying that Kismet likes to eat. He is a very healthy baby, and he eats. So, and he don't play. Like, when he's ready to eat, you better come out with that boob, and you better give him what he wants. So when I first had him on my first feeding session, my very first feeding session, he ate for 45 minutes. The first session. I couldn't believe that. Like, I recall, as I recall my other children, the first session was maybe 15 minutes maximum. The milk's hasn't really come in that much at the time of birth. So the 15 minutes is just, if they're their first little session. But this boy ate for 45 minutes, and I experienced something I had never experienced before, which was, for starters, nausea. I was very nauseous in that first session, and I happened to get a headache, an extreme tension headache, breastfeeding. And it was so bizarre to me, because I was always a pro at breastfeeding. I'm like, yep, put them on there, they latched well, and they fed well, and that was that. But when I felt the headache coming on, well, it was the nausea first. Started feeling nauseous, my mouth started watering, and I just knew I was going to throw up. I kind of got euphoric. I was kind of dizzy, lightheaded, and then I got the headache. The headache was the worst of all. I had a beating headache. It was in the back of my head, and it just was throbbing. I mean, that's what a migraine's got to feel like. I don't know that I've ever had one, but that, if I had to know what a migraine felt like, I would assume that would be it. It hurt. It hurt so bad. I didn't actually end up vomiting, but the nausea was so overpowering. I kept, spitting. I had the really bad mouth watering. And of course, we know when we're breastfeeding, the uterus contracts. And of course, breastfeeding assists with that. For those who don't know, it does assist with bringing the uterus back down to size. So I had pretty bad cramping. I can't say it was worse. I don't really recall. It hurt pretty bad. I do think it probably was a little worse. I'm not sure. But the cramping was nowhere near a test as the headache and the nausea were. So like I said, he breastfed for about 45 minutes. And in that 45 minutes, within about 10 minutes, I started feeling the nausea and the headache kicked in. And it lasted the whole time he was feeding. Like, I was sick. Like, I didn't even want to feed him because it hurt so bad. So I ended up doing some research about it. And as it turns out, it can be common. It's not irregular. We'll say that. Won't say it's common. If I'm not mistaken, don't quote me on the numbers. It was about 35%, 39%, or something like that of women do experience the headaches and possible nausea from breastfeeding, and it comes from the oxytocin, which is released when they breastfeed, and that's the same thing that, helps your uterus contract and whatnot. And the release of that hormone causes headaches in some women. Now, the research that I found said that it can last 6 to 8 weeks at a time, and it'll go away. It was saying, it'll go away within 6 weeks. That's ridiculous. If I had to experience that headache for 6 weeks, I don't know that I would have been able to handle it. With that being said, he was born on May the 12th, and every time I breastfed that day, I had the headache. I had the nausea. By that evening, they weren't as bad. But I did notice after a few feedings that once I would sit up, it would kind of go away. So I said, well, let me try breastfeeding sitting up. Let me not lay down, because I was laying down. I was tired. Of course, I was worn out. Had been giving birth. I said, let me try doing this sitting up and see how does that help. Now, the first time I breastfed sitting up was that evening. He was born at 7 a.m. And it was that night around 9-ish. I tried breastfeeding sitting up. And it did not help completely. It helped some. But I did have still a slight headache. But it was on a scale of 1 to 10, my headaches were at a 12. And by sitting up, they were like a 3. So that was cool. It was much better, although it was still frustrating. And then after that, I said, well, okay, it's better. I'm going to breastfeed sitting up from now on. And the next time, it was just the same regular pounding headache. So I just couldn't figure out what would be the best thing for me to do as far as breastfeeding and trying to relieve the headache. And that was all in the first day, first 24 hours. So the next day, which was yesterday, I had some of the same experience with the first couple of feedings. But as the day went on, they did lessen and lessen. And I noticed that they were getting, they weren't as bad as time went on. As my uterus was shrinking, as my body was adjusting, they were going away. They weren't as bad. And last night, by the end of the night last night, I actually didn't have any more headaches. And as I'm feeding right now, I'm not experiencing any nausea, any headaches. My uterus is contracting. It seems to start contracting about 15 minutes in as well. It doesn't start right away usually. But I noticed that massaging my uterus while it's contracting and hurting while I'm breastfeeding, I massage it while it's contracting, and that relieves the tension. I do like a circle massage, or I massage it on the outside of it, instead of directly on top of it, because it can be tender that way. But thankfully, I was able to be relieved of the headaches. And as I said, this is my 5th child, and I've never experienced that. So I don't know if anyone else is watching this has ever experienced it, but I want you to be, confident and be motivated that it will subside. And of course, it's probably different for everyone, but in my experience, it did go away. Now, I did last night have one issue, and I'm not sure it was related to the breastfeeding or not. Probably so, because it felt like the same type of headache. But I experienced, I woke up with a headache, and I wasn't feeding. And I was getting ready to feed, and I was actually kind of scared to feed because I didn't want the headache to get worse. So for about an hour and a half, maybe, I had a slight headache. Back on that scale, it was about a good 5 or a 6. And what I ended up doing was using an ice pack. I have a clay heating pad. It can be a heating pad or an ice pack. And I used it on my head. I would actually put it directly on my head. I put it on top of my head. I noticed putting it on my ears kind of helped. I first started on the back of my head where I was actually feeling the pain. And that it helped some, but it didn't seem to help as much as the side or the other side or like I said, directly on top of my head. When I had the headache at night, last night, I was asleep and I was kind of sitting up, and I had it on top of my head. I had it directly on top of my head. And it doesn't take the pain away, but it most certainly dulls it. It most certainly brings it down a notch so it's not so intense. And even when I was experiencing that during the breastfeeding, I had just Googling stuff, looking things up. I had ended up using that to relieve the headache. So that's just something that you can try to relieve the headache if you're experiencing that during breastfeeding. I did try peppermint for the nausea, and my doula ended up coming by and letting me know, the peppermint can lessen your milk supply. So I stopped eating them. Of course, at that time, my milk hadn't really started coming in yet. It just started coming in for real today. So I can't say whether that was my experience of it lessening my milk supply. But she did let me know that that can be the case. So try to stay away from that when dealing with the nausea. But anyway, baby Kismet's doing well. He's eating well. I just wanted to share my experience with the headaches and with the nausea with the breastfeeding because it was something new for me. And I know they say every pregnancy is different. Every postpartum experience is different. Every child is different. So this was definitely different for me. But I'm encouraged, and I made it through those couple of days. The headaches, as I said, they were awful. But I made it through, and my body did adjust. So be encouraged. Don't give up. And good luck to all you breastfeeding mamas. Peace.